Welcome. My name is John, and I've been studying Qigong for long enough that I should know something about it, but long enough that I also know that I don't know much about it. So a little bit of my history. First came across it in '97. I was interested in healing practices and spiritual traditions, and it was a practice that for me, the framework just worked. You know, sometimes you plug into something and you go, that makes sense. And for years, I thought that I'd found the answer to everything. And then I found out that no, that's just the way my head works. So a lot of the work that I then went on to do, as well as training to teach Qigong, running classes, setting up a teacher training school, which started 2011, 2012, all of this is quite traditional. All of this is quite normal. The bit that I think is interesting, is that I started going and working in the corporate sector. I started doing work around communication skills, leadership development, dealing with conflict, using Qigong. I didn't want to do well-being. The well-being agenda in corporate, to be honest, tends to be more about productivity than well-being. Leave that one alone. And then about a decade ago, I started to get involved in integrative medicine. And the skills that I'd learned in corporate became really interesting working in integrative medicine. Yeah. And then from that point, something else happened, because I started getting involved with universities and academia. So what I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon, it's definitely afternoon. What I'd like to share with you is the process by which we've got Oxford University and Oxford Health engaged in doing research into the use of Qigong for chronic pain. So that's the process I want to go through. So Qigong for chronic pain, a long-term research project. Okay, so just before we start, and I'm kind of curious who's here. So can I just do kinds of shows of hands for certain things? People experienced in Chinese medicine. That's really bloody intimidating. Right, okay. People experienced in Western medicine. Excellent, right. I may lean on you. People who are involved in research? Thank God for that. Right. Anyone who is okay? A quick check-in on who has come across Qigong before. Who practices Qigong? Anyone teach Qigong? Oh, bugger. There's always one. Okay. I'd like to start by asking the question: what is Qigong? And the reason I have to ask this is that I think that we've got some weird definitions at the moment. Already in the talks today, we've heard about issues with translation. And what I've found is that if you want to get people to understand what Qigong is, you've got to make it accessible. So when we simplify it to something like, oh, breath work, because Qi is breath and Gong is work, go away. I'm not interested. Qi is not breath. Energy work, bit better, still a bit crap. Okay? I want to know what is Qigong. One of the bits of work that I did was for the ITER project in the south of France. Have you come across the ITER project? Truly, truly terrifying. I walked into the conference to do leadership. They had about 600 people in the conference hall, and they asked them, who here has worked on the Large Hadron Collider in CERN? And about a third of the people put their hand up. Oh. And who has worked on the International Space Station? And about another third put their hand up. They're building the world's first nuclear fusion power station, commercially viable nuclear fusion power station. And I'm there as a Qigong teacher. And so I gave them a definition of Qi. And I used the etymology of the character. So the earliest, and please correct me on this afterwards. Don't make me look bad now. Okay. The earliest recorded character for Qi was on the oracle bones, as I understand it. So we're talking about 2000 BC. My dates are horrible. I'm happy to be corrected on that. It was just 3 lines. By the way, I just saw the photo. There'll be a QR code at the end. If you want the slideshow, I don't know why anybody would. You can scan the QR code and get all the slides. Right. Carrying on. 3 lines. And the 3 lines denote vapor rising to form clouds. So I stood there in front of these nuclear physicists being all mystical, vapor rising to form clouds. And then I said, but if you think about it, what we're talking about is you can't see the vapor, but you can see the clouds. So if you look out the window, you can't today, tough, and you can see the leaves moving on the trees. You can't see the wind, but you can see the effect of the wind. And they went, right, okay. If I look at the cables that are around the room, I can't see the electric running through it, but I can see the lights coming on. I'm like, okay. So Qi is not a word in the way that I present it. It's an idea, it's a concept, it's a grouping of things. And we have Qi within us. That's what animates us, that's what gives us life. So I tend to present it like that. And then Gong, work, disagree with that one as well. Skill. Kung Fu is skill. So I like the idea of becoming skillful with your clicker. Becoming more skillful with your Qi. Qigong is the practice of becoming more skillful with your Qi. And I'd like to throw something else in here. How old is Qigong? Started in the 1950s. Sorry to disappoint you. It's really bloody recent. Okay? The origins of it are really old. But Qigong actually came into being in the 1950s as Qigong therapy in response to a health crisis that was going on in China. It became a term that got used to describe Neigong and another one that I can't remember the name of that I should. How bad of me. It's an umbrella term for a number of practices. Okay, we don't need to go into the history in China since 1950, but we can say that there was a second resurgence in the 80s and 90s. And again, Qigong was being promoted as something for public health. The origins of it are ancient. We can point at the Tao Yin, we can point at all of the old systems, but actually let's not get so damn precious about it. It's a modern categorization of things that have been used in order to deal with public health that draw their roots from something far older. I feel as if that gives us as Qigong practitioners permission to mess around with it a little bit. And I like messing around with things. Okay, so this is how I would define Qigong. So then I also want to pull something else apart, the concept of mastery. We'll bounce around a little bit and then you'll see why I bounced around. Okay, I have a fundamental distrust for anybody who describes themselves as a master such and such. I always want to ask, who called the master master? You know, you're kind of imposing a hierarchy. I am the person with the answers. You need to listen to me. I like the idea that mastery should be considered to be, it should not be considered to be the pinnacle, rather the foundation from which we build. Let me explain. Who here can ride a bike? What happened when you learned how to ride a bike, when you mastered the skill of riding a bike? Did you become the best cyclist in the world? No, you were just able to use the tool to do something helpful for yourself. That is the point of mastery. The point of mastery to me is the point at which you don't need to go, am I doing that bit right? That's not Qigong. The point that we start to become more skillful with our energy is when we start to become able to actually use the skill to become more skillful with our energy. Sorry, that didn't make sense. You know where I'm going. Okay, so the concept of mastery, and again, this is a really important piece when we look at what we did with Oxford. There's another thing that I think we need to actually just make a point of here, which is mastering the skill means that we can focus on the benefit of the skill. One of the forms of Qigong that I occasionally teach people has, in order to go through the whole process, it takes an hour. It's a detailed process that works from the top of the head all the way down to the bottom of the feet with specific movements and intentions for each of the parts of the body. How long does it take to experience the benefit of that as a traditional form? You've got to remember the whole form. You've got to remember all the theory. You've got to remember all the application. You've got to put it all together, and then you've got to relax. Yeah, you can do that in a week. No, it takes ages. How quickly can we give people the benefit? Okay, right, moving on. Let's say, I'll bounce around a little bit. The other thing that I found in the time in corporate was that most people, and again, this is really relevant when you talk about the Oxford work, most people, when you work with them, they're not interested in Qigong. They're interested in what benefit can they get from Qigong. So therefore, you need to be able to listen. You need to be able to understand what language you can use, how you can interact. If I look at the way that I was trained in China in Qigong, they never train you to listen. The pedagogic style that I experienced was, I do, you copy. I speak, you listen. There was nothing there that gave any idea that as a Qigong teacher, you should listen to anybody, because everybody should listen to you. Come back to the idea of master again. And it's a real shame, because I think that if we want to be effective, and as people working within therapeutic environments, you have to be able to listen in some form to the people that you work with. And to me, it didn't really exist within Qigong, which I thought was horrific. I found this out by going and working in corporate. And while I was there, have people come across Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Yeah? This, I think, is just beautiful. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. The nature of listening within Qigong should be present. It should be an awareness practice. Okay, so we've put all of these bits together. I can't remember what comes next. There we go. So I had to ask the question and listen to the answer. So I started talking to medics. I started talking to academics. I started talking to a range of people and asking the question, why does Qigong and Tai Chi not work? What is it in the way of it that prevents it from being accessible to you? Why do you not want to engage? And I have to listen. And I heard some really interesting stuff. Now, at the time, I was working with the, go back a moment. At the time, I was working with the College of Medicine. Anyone come across College of Medicine? Okay, it's a really important, it's the group of people that are kind of behind social prescribing. It's run by the King's GP. And I was kind of in the centre of it for a little while until they found out who I was and they kicked me out. No, not quite. But one of the issues that I had, they started using the term CAM therapies. Have people come across CAM as a description for complementary and alternative medicine? So I said, what do you mean by CAM therapies? Because there are a number of ways that it's looked at. And what I was told was a complementary system works with a Western diagnosis. An alternative works with a non-Western diagnosis. So what that said to me was I can never work in a complementary way with people who practice Western medicine. And I thought that was terrible. Because it created kind of a separation. And the thing that I thought was weird was that in the middle of this, we have the person. We have the experience. We have the symptom that they experience. But what's happened is with these classifications of medicine, there's a tendency for people to be turned into diagnosis. Okay, that's a big subject. Don't want to go there at the moment. But it became obvious that I couldn't work as a Qigong practitioner with people with a Western diagnosis because it would undermine all my credibility. And there is no academic interest in Eastern diagnosis in the UK.
What about complementary therapies?
Complementary, in this structure, in this definition, complementary has to be Western medicine. There are multiple ways this is expressed. The CMA do not actually talk about it in this term. But it was just that interaction. And it was the King's GP, it was a whole load of people who were significant, Chris Whitty, people like this. And you were just like, okay, I get the message. And I carried on asking questions. And then I found a couple more bits. I was told when we paid when we actually got a couple of literary reviews done, that the literary reviews show that the current research lacks relevance and doesn't create a strong enough foundation. I was like, what? There's loads of research about Qigong and Tai Chi. What's wrong with it? Well, most of it can be summed up as this person who's been studying Qigong for 30 years turned up and did this and created a good effect. And so then you can tear it apart going, right, what did they do? How much of it was to do with the movement? How much of it was to do with opening Shen Men? Or how much of it was to do with that? How much of it was to do with the way they worked? How much of it was to do with the group that they were working with? How much of it was, we talk about Qi field in my practice of Jineng Qigong, the coherence of the group. You can tear it apart really quickly. It's one of the issues that we've found with the research around hypnotherapy and NLP as well. It's very easy to actually go, difficult to nail down where the benefit is. So that was a bit of a, oh, I need to rethink what I'm doing here. And then it got worse. Because I was told that it's not, we can't do it in a Western healthcare environment. Why? Why can't you do Qigong in a Western healthcare environment? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, it requires the individuals to take responsibility. Most people who go to the NHS go there for an operation or a tablet. They don't go there to be told, practice this for 3 hours every day, which is the standard thing within the practice that I'm trained in. If someone has a significant diagnosis, practice Qigong for 3-4 hours a day, diligently. Don't stand there in front of a clock, ignore the clock, just practice. How many people have got time to do that? And the second thing that came up is that, need time devoted to practice. I've just given you the second thing that came up. So you feel like you've hit a brick wall. But I'm a bit of a tenacious sod. I'm someone who doesn't give up that easily. So I then turned around and went, right, what conclusions have we drawn here? So the first conclusion is that the research cannot be based on diagnosis. It has to be based on a symptom. Chronic pain is a symptom. We're not reinforcing a Western diagnosis. We're not heading into an Eastern diagnosis. We're working with the person who is experiencing chronic pain. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who here is directly interested in chronic pain? Thought so. Okay. The second thing was the approach needs to offer immediate and obvious benefit. It needs to be something that is akin to going and taking a paracetamol and going, oh, that feels better. We had to develop an approach that meant that we could get really quick results. And then the other thing that came up was the process needs to be easily replicated. It needs to be scalable, because if you prove one person can do it, that is of very little interest to a National Health Service. And it needs to be financially viable. We have to put a business case together. So what we decided to do was ask the question, actually, that's probably on the next slide. Key steps, here we go. I'm almost remembering where it is. So the first thing that we had to do is come up with a process that we felt that we could train people in. And say, how quickly can we train people in it, but prove the concept. So what we did is we took some very simplified Qigong into the homeless community in Oxford through the Luther Street practice. And the homeless community is it's an easy target. I'm somebody who goes for easy wins. The conversations with the medical community, I was always asking, where do you feel as if you need help? So chronic pain they need help with, and it's amplified within the homeless community because they will not prescribe opiate-derived painkillers because of addiction issues. So you've got a double win. So we went and worked with the homeless community, and we tried the process. And the idea is that the Qigong that we teach, you have to be able to master it. There you go, tying it back in. You see, it's all weaving together in 3 breaths or 3 repetitions. That quick. And so we asked them in a 20-minute session at the end to just take a moment, try the process and say, how many breaths does it take before they feel a significant reduction in pain? Every single person said 3 breaths. At which point, the doctor who was present, his jaw almost hit the floor and the researcher almost fainted. It was great. It was just, I wish I'd got that moment on camera. So we've proved the concept. So then we needed to go, how quickly can we train people? Because if you take out, I train Qigong teachers. It takes 2 years to train Qigong teachers. Not because the form is complex, but because the way you interact with people, the way you hold space for an hour or 4 hours or a retreat takes skill, it takes time. We need to understand health and safety issues. We need to understand contraindications. We need to understand all of these things. But if we go and train healthcare professionals who already understand a lot of the stuff around a safe interaction in a healthcare environment, we've taken a whole load of training out. So we chose to target physiotherapists and occupational therapists. I knew the word would come if I paused. And we found that we came up with a program that we said that we felt we could do in 2 days, working with our partners at Oxford Health and Oxford Uni. And the program consists of 4 basic movements, really simple theory. I heard dry needling mentioned earlier. I think it's really important that when people teach Qigong, they understand the concept of Qi. And we use a model of Qi, space and information, which I'm happy to share, but not now because I want to get through so we can practice. But really accessible. And the reason we use that is that the Western medics and the paramedics and the researchers and all the people that we've worked with, we've shared a lot of the theory with them. We said, which one makes sense to you? And every single one said Qi, space, information. It changed the whole way I viewed it. We teach them how to engage with the Western audience. Remember the concept of master again? The person doesn't stand there as the authority. The person stands there as a listening ear, sharing ideas, sharing stories. There's a whole process that we change the whole pedagogic style. It's not a petals course. It's not a training to teach children to remember shit. Excuse my language. It's about how can you create effect? How can you create benefit? Where are we now? We've just got the funding thing. Well, we should have the funding thing coming through in the next week for what we call a quality improvement program. The people from Southampton University who were involved in this said, go straight for a full research piece. The people from Oxford said, you haven't got enough proof. And I sat in a rather intriguing but slightly dull argument between the 2 universities. But what it really turned out was the people at Oxford said, we need to get a significant research grant for this. And to get a significant research grant, we need to get a better body of evidence. Whereas the people from Southampton said, we can go with a smaller research grant. I was like, fight it out between yourselves. But what we've actually come up with is funding for what they call a QI project, a quality improvement program, where we do a small scale piece which collects data and proves concept again. It's just another step. And then once we've gone through that, which we're hoping we should have completed by within 12 months, we're then going into the full research program. And the full research program isn't working with the homeless community because it's very difficult to get good quality data, working with people whose lives can be quite chaotic. And also the main people that we're working with at Oxford, their interest is around chronic pain in an aging population. So shoot at the open goal. So we're going for working and exploring the idea of chronic pain in an aging population. Okay.
Sorry, your end goal?
The end goal actually isn't this.
Okay, I'm trying to figure it out.
The end goal is to actually start to introduce Qigong-based technique, not Qigong classes, into the NHS in order to create significant change and get people to start to understand that they can take responsibility for their own health. I have got an absolute passion about working around people with addiction issues, because I think the whole area of addiction is just, I hate the idea once an addict, always an addict. Every addict that I've worked with who has recovered no longer considers themselves to be an addict. Every single one of them says how bad the 12-step program was for them. Every single one of them talks about the power of Qigong and the ideas within Qigong in order to create significant change. And that also reflects one of the other big issues that's happening within the NHS around deprescribing. So there's a number of things that are pulling together here. So what I'd like to do is do a little bit of practice. But let's just quickly check in and see if there's any questions or anything.
I'm a paediatric nurse by background.
Excellent.
So I work with patients with sickle cell as well. Would Qigong be effective?
Of course, I'm going to say yes. I think the skill within Qigong, if we look at it within the traditional processes around 5-element or 3 treasures or any of the other normal frameworks, they require an understanding of the underlying theory. But the way that we're approaching Qigong within this, we're actually going, how can allowing the body to relax, allowing the mind to relax, creating space for things to change, how can that benefit you, the person at the end? The whole premise for the chronic pain piece is that if you look at the papers that I've been looking at around chronic pain, a lot of the issues are that at the point that there is no physical evidence of a cause of pain, it becomes something that is very difficult to manage. But from my training in Qigong, and I wouldn't say Chinese medicine because I feel woefully inadequate having listened to everybody today, the body and the mind are connected. And so the physical experience of pain can relate to the belief that something's going to hurt. If you think something's going to hurt, it creates tension. So therefore, if you allow both the body and the mind to relax, what you find is that everything changes very quickly. Okay. Any other questions before we dive in? Sir?
I've been working with people who have been seen dead in this room. One way perhaps to make them sit up and listen would be if you gave me a reference saying, here's some work performed by these universities looking into this as a potential project. These people will then perhaps accept that there is research being conducted by serious institutions, but this is not some sort of rubbish time or anybody like me is trying to propagate.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we want to achieve here. We want to actually create that solid body of evidence because there is something here that we can do. The thing that is a shame is how long it's going to take. The timescale on this particular research project is 10 years. Because they say it's going to take that long to provide credible evidence. But it isn't to say that it won't gain momentum over that period of time. And there's actually a second project that's going on at the moment where I'm working with the person who developed health coaching in the NHS, the education lead from the Royal London, which is somewhere near here. I get lost in London. The head of the social prescribing network, where we're looking at redefining the concept of healing within the health service. And we have support of some significant people there. And that also ties in. So yeah, there's some kind of big stuff.
Can I ask a question about a couple of things you said about, you said that for the NHS, people will be looking after their own health. And you've just said it's going to take 10 years to roll out. And then you've just said about how, you're looking at sort of like quite progressive ideas in the NHS. Typically, like Western medicine and the NHS is about sort of symptomatic management and sort of pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
So how is it that, why is it that they're buying into it? Why is the NHS buying into it? Or are they buying into it sort of saying, well, we'll buy into it, but we'll make it wait 10 years because actually we're quite happy with the current system?
There is a question of the financials and the workload that sit with this. Because if you look at the level of workload required by people within Western medicine, it's vast. And if we can do something that starts to allow people to start to do something for themselves, then that will free up a bit more time. The NHS, I think everybody in the room would agree that the NHS is in some form of crisis. And so in that situation, having alternatives becomes far more viable. If everyone who I've spoken to within the health service who feels as if they are doing a good job, there's no point in having the conversation anymore. There's no space for anything different to happen. This was reflected. No, I won't go there. Too political.